In this video, I talk about how to actually hit your first 100K a month and mainly the three most common mistakes as to why people can't actually achieve that goal that most people don't talk about, right? So, in most cases, this is what a typical blueprint looks like when people are trying to reach that goal in layman terms, right? First, they start out with an offer. They help out a couple people with their offer in whatever industry that may be. And then they decide, well, now I want to actually hit this 6 figure a month goal. Hence, now I'm trying to get a product market fit at scale. And if you were to do the math, let's just say that's 20 units at $5,000 per month to hit that goal. And usually it's running ads to a cold audience with some sort of, fancy funnel. And the objective is to obviously book a call and wanting to close those calls. And then, hey, all you got to do is rinse and repeat. Wish it were that easy though, right? So what happens most likely in this scenario is in most cases, you start running cold ads, obviously because it's a cold audience, right? At first, you're probably not getting any calls booked. And so you start actually turning your wheels and saying, okay, let's see how this works. And let's say you actually do start booking calls. What ends up happening is you end up having lots of no shows or lack of quality, and you start to doubt, and you honestly end up going in circles trying to hire people, trying to change things, and you kind of end up getting into a point where you end up giving up, right? So the three main things that most people don't look at, and I like to break this down into macro and micro, is the first actually being the funnel to actually start out with, right? And so I'm not here to say that you have to start out with this funnel, but the first thing that you want to do is you want to actually test, is my offer something that the market wants? Just because you actually got results as to where you're at right now, that doesn't always mean that you're, the market actually wants with what you're offering, right? Because the people that you probably got results for, they were probably close friends or people that you knew of or people that already knew you. But at scale, what does this look like to a cold audience? And this is where people actually, start having the most struggles, right? So what I always recommend, again, it doesn't have to be this way, but what I recommend for the purposes of a product market fit is to simply start with a call funnel, right? Meaning your objective is to book calls, and more specifically a DTA funnel, meaning a direct to application, right? So instead of some sort of fancy VSL where you have to do lots of editing and lots of scripting, all you simply have to do is have your offer, right? On the headline of the landing page, just put the offer there, call out who you're talking to, and then for them to book a call, you have maybe 3 to 5 questions that are intent questions for them to understand, for you to understand more about them so that it can help you on the actual closing call when you actually book a call, right? And then in a more simple manner as well, I always like saying start out with static image ads. And the reason is because it's super simple to just create some image ads on Canva and have different awareness levels and start, having different things as to the hooks, the angles, their pain points with obviously your offer. But again, it doesn't require this high production of having to hire a copywriter, a video editor, and go through a lot of scripting and all these things that you may not even know if it's something that an offer that the market actually wants. So start simple. The great thing is that you can get simple and quick data. And again, the data is, do people want to actually book calls? Hence, meaning, are they interested in your offer? And you actually get to establish and understand, is this an actual product market fit, right? And so again, the two main objectives here that you're trying to focus on is my offer something that people want? Hence, and therefore, people are going to book calls, meaning the market wants to actually book calls because they're interested in my offer, right? So I want you to think of it that way for the first step, right? It's simply just offer and booking calls. And it's just, it's very congruent with each other. If they want that offer, they're going to book calls. If they don't, they're not going to book calls, right? And so if there is some sort of metrics or calls not being booked, it's not always because you don't have the fanciest creative or the fanciest video, which most people say. Sure, that can help down the line, right, with things at scale, but it's really mainly because the offer is poor. And what I mean by that is when you're thinking of an offer, I know there's lots of people who talk about like guarantees and all these things, and that's still good. But now the market has become so saturated with everybody saying like, or we'll pay you, or we'll refund you, or we'll work with you for free, or we'll give you $1,000 check. It's like, cool, that's fine. But if you think of that type of offer, it means that, if I fail, this will happen. Hence, why don't you think of it and flip it on its head of saying like, hey, I'll show you a result first, and then we can actually start working together long term, right? So you don't always have to think guarantees. You have to think of trials, challenges, lower ticket prices to deliver a micro result first. That's my belief and my recommendation. And with that type of offer, then people are going to be interested in that. And now your delivery and your results and fulfillment is on the line, as it should be, because you're the expert in this topic and industry. And then once you deliver, boom, higher LTV, right? And then you can sign them on for the bigger package, or the higher ticket price, right? So in this specific scenario, just think of an offer, and the best way to think of this is stop thinking about yourself. Stop thinking about how you can get paid right now. Start thinking, what does your prospect actually want? What are the current challenges that they're going through, and the other offers and competitors that you have out there? And how can you present yourself different from them and actually be on the prospect side, so it makes sense for them to actually be interested in you compared to those other people inside your industry that you may actually feel are the giants or competitors or so on and so forth. Super easy to stand out, right? So keep this process until you book calls. And then once you start booking calls, you go on to stage 2, right? And so hence, if there's people booking calls, it basically means that is something that the market wants and is interested in, and they're willing to actually put in their information, answer the form, and actually book a call, and people are interested. Doesn't always mean that they're going to buy. This is just stage 1, and then we're going to go to stage 2. All right. So recap: offer and booking calls. The second thing that's important after this, and this is where a lot of people actually, I would say at least 60 to 70% of people that I talk to on a daily basis and offers that I see are pretty much in this boat, right? Most people have the funnel, they're booking the calls, and they have that process. Their offer is hence validated on the front end, right? But now they're running into this issue. What does it look like for people to actually show up to the call? And so there's a couple things. I'm going to go pretty into detail in the micro and the nitty gritty of this as to how to actually establish this process. But when you step outside and you think of this, the main reason people aren't showing up to the call, again, think like the prospect, don't think like yourself. Because if you start thinking like yourself, you're like, why did this person put in the information? Why didn't they show up? They're just wasting my time, blah, blah, blah. Don't think like that. Think like the prospect, because you're trying to be in the prospect's shoes and trying to understand them first before you actually start thinking about how you properly think, right? Think of this. They do not want to show up because they don't trust you yet, because you are running a cold ad to a cold audience. And although they're interested in the offer, they don't know, like, and trust you yet. Mainly, they don't trust you, right? And if they don't trust you, they're not going to spend their time to want to actually look at their emails, open the Zoom link, and actually show up to the call, and then, commit 30 to 45 minutes to talking about what they're interested in. They don't trust you yet, but there are things that can actually fix this. And little side rant, this is where most offers actually struggle, and they keep just trying to book more calls, but they never fix this gap as to a lack of trust, as to why people aren't actually showing up to the call. And then they go in circles, and they feel like their offer doesn't work, or they misunderstand the process and they think, well, these people have to show up, and now, we have to get closers instead of close them. Why isn't it happening? Why isn't it happening? And then you go in circles, right? And then the owner's always the bad guy, right? So, like I said, I already kind of went through this rant, right? They're obviously interested in your offer. They book a call, but they have to trust you to actually show up, right? So here's a couple things that you can do. You can do a combination that once somebody actually books a call, right, you can have some sort of texting confirmation sequence, personalized, right? And what I mean by personalized is like shooting a video, showing them, hey, I see that, your form's here. I'm super excited to talk about, what the next steps would look like. Shoot me a text of confirm, or just a manual text. Or you can have a calling sequence where once they book a call, right, you text them and then you dial them, and you start getting understanding of where they're at, and if they're actually meant to show up if they're actually, you know, they actually are quality to actually be part of that call for you to actually host that call with them, hence a closer call, right? So if you were to have that type of call or that text sequence to actually talk to them, I just shot other ideas for you. It really talks, what you should really talk about is the urgency, the finances, and intent, right? So how bad do they want this based on your offer? What does their financial, situation look like? Again, you don't always have to be like, do you have I've seen people talk about this, like, I want the sending script to be like, do you have $5,000 to invest right now? And how seriously? It's like, dude, you're trying to get into a closing call. Understand the financial context of their situation right now. And then obviously, what is their intent? And a lot of this you can get through tonality of understanding the questions that you ask, and then what they're responding and how their feedback is from there, right? So in essence, you can have a confirmation sequence for them to show up and understanding them through a pre-call script, right? You can also have really good sales assets and pre-call resources. You can have different videos, you can have testimonials, you can have different things like being on a podcast for them to actually watch to understand a little bit more about you. Because the truth is, whether you believe it or not, they're searching you through different content, through different Google searches, so on and so forth, right? Another thing that I like doing actually that really helps is having, and this is more on the ad side, is since you're running ads, you can have a retargeting window of 7 days of value videos that you give them, testimonials that you've had, FAQs that they probably will have, and objections that they may have. And you can run a video views campaign to make sure that Meta is actually forcing this content to them while they're actually waiting for you to actually have a call. So if today's Thursday and they have a call Saturday morning, you can have 5 to 10 videos of all these different types of topics that can force them to actually want to watch on the platform, meaning they're going to shoot these videos into their platform on Facebook and Instagram. And it's going to help actually by giving them content to review without even intentionally trying to. They're just going to see it on their, when they open up Facebook or Instagram, take a little bit of a review of you or sneak peek based on the different types of videos. And I always like giving different values, different things that provide value, different testimonials, different FAQ questions and objections that they may have so that you can prime them up even before the actual call. All right. Other things, guys, they're searching you, right? YouTube videos per week. You can have a couple of YouTube videos, long form content. You don't have to be the biggest, you don't have to be the biggest YouTuber out there with the most subscribers. People will watch your content because if they're serious and they have that actual intent and they actually want to solve that problem that they're having, 1 or 2 videos that they watch that are anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 plus minutes, or even 5 to 10 minutes, where you're going over a specific topic, you're talking about how, you've helped XYZ person or whatever, people are going to digest that content. And whether you know it or not, that actually helps for them to not only show up to the call, but actually be qualified for the call as well, right? And so what you want to do with this combination of YouTube videos, even content, on Instagram and Facebook, with the retargeting and with the assets that you give them and with the confirmation sequences, you want to be able to track your show rate, right? Obviously you have a tracking sheet, and then from the calls being booked to the people that showed up, track what that number looks like. I always say that it's always good to have at least a 70% show rate in this day and age. 80% and higher is obviously great. Anything lower than 60 or 50%, right? I said 70% here, but like you can probably play around by having like a 60 to 70%. Anything lower than that, I always say the biggest thing that can help out that you have a grasp of is the confirmation calls. Meaning, let's put this in a real scenario. If people aren't responding back to you, and then you see that most of those people are actually not showing up, you can DQ those calls. Or if people are picking up and it sounds like they're saying all the right answers, but then they're not showing up, then there has to be something done with how you're asking the questions, your tonality, and also how you interpret what they're saying to you, because it might not be the best responses, but you're just understanding it as a good response because you're just thinking about getting the sale and booking that call or keeping that call in that case, right? So if your show rate is still less than 70% and you still have good confirmation calls, right? What I would probably do in this scenario is you can make the resistance of them to actually book a call a little bit more difficult and harder for them to actually book a call. And you can also change the calendar days, right? So, on the first topic, what you can do is you can add more questions so that makes it harder for them to actually book a call, and ask more intentional questions of, you know, the things that bring higher intent for them to actually book a call. So, example, right? Instead of just, multiple choice, you can start now adding text that they have to actually fill out on the form. And what I mean by that is a paragraph, right? Not a whole paragraph, but when you create a type form or things on GHL, you can make sure that they have to type in a response instead of just clicking something, because that could just mean that they're just doing it really quickly instead of actually putting some thought into it. So an easy question would be like, why do you feel like this is something important for you right now? And then they have to at least type that out. Or on a level 1 to 10, you know how do you feel about, how serious are you about this, in this current situation, and then why is that the case, so on and so forth. And when you ask those sample type of questions, it makes it harder for them to actually book a call, but you're bringing more higher intent people. Your cost might go up, but they actually have to type in information, and then from the form you can actually see, hey, is this person serious or not, right? A lot of other things manually that you can do with the calendar space. A lot of times people book 3 to 4 days out. You can make it same day or next day booking. And in that way, you can actually make sure that that type of process becomes easier for them to show up, because it's not 3 or 4 days out, they forget, so on and so forth, right? So with this process, this is where most people struggle with. It really takes an understanding of what's actually the bottleneck. I gave you a couple different scenarios for you to kind of use and implement, but what it really comes down to is being able to have somebody to, whether it's you or somebody else, to be able to understand and analyze in this process what's actually going on, what are the things that you have to fix, and then being able to implement those processes so that you have the correct puzzle pieces, so that you have a show up rate of at least 70%. Right. So recap: the offer, the positioning of the offer, the funnel, all this good stuff, right? To make sure that people are booking calls. Then we have, once you book calls, are people actually showing up? Now, where we're going to go to is, what does it look like to actually close calls, right? But what ends up happening is, if people don't fix the first two stages of what I just presented, then it's actually hard for you to actually just run an ad with a random offer that you even know that works, and then people aren't showing up, and then obviously you can't close people that don't show up, hence you being frustrated and going in circles, right? So now we're going into the closing calls, and a lot of this has to do with closing frameworks and also pixel conditioning on meta ads, so on the front end. But I'm going to talk about the closing frameworks first, right? I'm also add a little bit things here, right? So when it comes to closing, simply, it's always broken down, what I do, into three different sections: discovery, pitch, objections. Discovery, pitch, objections. How are you talking about their current state, the results that they want, the problems inside the discovery, how are you pitching it, and also what are the objections that they have, how do you overcome that as well, right? So a good understanding is that, what I believe is that you don't always need one script that's going to help, with any industry and every avatar, so on and so forth, right? So different industries and avatars have different scripts and frameworks, right? Like a credit repair business is going to be a completely different type of framework versus, a marketing agency. And a marketing agency is going to be a completely different framework from a fitness offer, right? So really what you want to do is you want to understand what is the right framework for your current avatar and prospects, because if you find and are getting closer to that, then it's easier for you to be in a position where you're not always having to be, trying to just hire a sales coach, use their script and frameworks, and then wondering why it doesn't work for your offer, right? So, be intelligent about this, understand your prospect, understand what they want and what they need, and then, use those frameworks accordingly, right? So I'm going to add a couple things here because I wanted to after reviewing this, right? One of the biggest things first, and I'll actually add this here on the side, just so it's here, framing and tonality, right? A lot of times when it comes to taking a call, this is my belief as well, and I believe this could be applicable to most offers. If you have the right framing on the actual call, then you'll be able to do a lot of the heavy lifting afterwards. If you also have the right tonality, which I believe goes with framing of how you frame yourself on the call and how you frame the call in itself, that's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Because if you come off across somebody that's a pushover, somebody that they don't take you seriously, or it's super easy just to them to take charge of the call. And again, you don't have to be a jerk about this, but if you have the framing where it's super easy for them to control the call and you're just letting things be, you pretty much lost the battle in the call. And I'm saying that you have to win it all the time in this egotistical way, but you lost control of the call, right? And a lot of your tonality, a lot of your body language, a lot of your framing presented on the call could do a lot of the heavy lifting without you even trying to use all the fanciest word tracks, so on and so forth, right? So that's step one when it comes to closing frameworks, is have the right framing of the call. That all depends on the industry that you're in. The second thing that I believe, and a framework that I personally like using, is making sure that you overcome objections on the front end, right? So if anybody's having some sort of trust objections or anything where they're skeptical, or any financial objections, approach that actually in the beginning of the call, right? And if you do that, then you can start understanding the situation and then the objections on the front end, so that you're minimizing those objections on the back end. Scenario, and let me give an example here, right? So somebody starts, and a lot of times with this stuff, it's about knowing how to pick up when people are speaking on a certain topic, right? So if they start asking, like, or start saying, yeah, and I've been wanting this for 6 months, but it's just really hard to trust, people these days, and I've always just kind of checked out different things, and I'm not really a person who really trusts a lot, mainly because my finances have been like up and down recently, so it's just been really hard for me. But yeah, it's been for 6 months. A lot of times closers might just skip that process, or offer owners who are closers at the moment, and they just might be like, great, and how do you feel about the 6 months? But they gave you a lot of objections right there. They gave you trust and they gave you finances, and they kind of told you that kind of goes hand in hand and is congruent to each other, right? So instead of asking that question of, well, how does it feel to be the typical script, you can start saying, got it, that makes sense. And got it, that makes sense. You also did say that it's been hard for you to trust. How long has that been the case, and why do you feel that that's something that you've struggled with, and what's changed for you to actually now start trusting, because you actually showed up to the call and you're talking about this right now. That right there can help overcome the objection. With the finances, you can say, got it, I understand that. Are you still in that same position? Like, does it even make sense for you to even be in a call like this if things are really tight? And then you can start almost taking a step back from them, see if they come to you to see where they actually are financially, if they're interested in it as well. So those are just scenarios, right, that I just came up right now of how to actually handle that. But those are important to overcome on the front end, so that when you're not pitching and you're like, hey, it's $5,000, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, yeah, you know what? It's just really hard to trust. And now it's kind of awkward at the end, because you're like, all right, like the commission breath comes out. It's like, all right, well, now let's talk about trust. Let's talk about finances, and let's try to close it right now, when all that stuff could have been handled on the front end. Right. So in the discovery, I always say, why do they need this? How long has this been the case? Why is it important now? Urgency, pain points, solutions, and all that stuff as well. Here, what I always do, and I'm going to add to this as well, because as I keep talking, I know there's more stuff here, and I'm just trying to be as simple, but something that you guys can take as much out of this. With the pitch, I always find this to be super helpful. When I say pitch them what they actually want, a lot of times the way that you position your pitch is actually super valuable as well, right? And what do I mean by that? What I mean is different things like price anchors and bonuses, right? And a lot of times, the more you have price anchors and you have bonuses as well, the more the value could be the same exact thing, but the perception of value actually increases a lot, right? So here's a quick scenario, an example. So if the program's 5K for 16 weeks, you can frame the pitch and position the pitch with a price anchor and a bonus like this. Yeah, so typically with the owner, since he's had such great results, typically what he does with this program is he'll usually work with them for about 3 months, or let's say 2 months, right? For 2 months with one-on-one, and gets them to reach the goal of XYZ. And through that one-on-one access, it's $20,000. Or what he has found is that more people actually have gotten more results collectively together when he hosts different ways to actually collectively in a group to help people in this way with the same strategy in the same manner. And all it is simply $5,000 for 4 weeks or 4 months, right? And then when you say that, right, the $20,000 seems like it's a big shock, and they're like, oh, okay, he does one-on-one. But actually, for 4 months, it's only 5K. And the way you kind of present it that way, obviously, I just did it off the cuff, right? So mine has been as polished. But when you present it that way, it's like typically it's 20K for 8 weeks for one-on-one. Or, what we found is that collectively, we've even got more results because more people are asking different questions, learning from each other, and supporting each other. So that way, the reason we did that is to make sure that we get the most results collectively. So now we just make it also 5K for 4 months. And you can add a bonus, right? And on top of that, we also give lifetime access to this completely free if you just pay it all in full. Now they actually, having the perception of that increases so much, right? So that's what I mean by pitch them what they want. A lot of things that I also add in, again, I'm just throwing a lot here, right? But something that can actually help is also assuming the close, right? And what I mean by assume the close is I always say take the deal with this as well. So here are two things that I want to talk about. Assuming the close basically means that once somebody says yes, just go straight to sending the invoice, right? So if they're in a position right now and they're like, got it, and you're, battling objections, you're talking, having, conversation, and they're like, this is something that I want to do. I think it makes sense. Instead of just saying like, are you sure? Why are the reasons that you're sure? Kind of ask more questions, be like, great. So what I'm gonna do is just send you the invoice to your email or in the link here below in the chat, and then we'll get started right away. Right. So you're helping them and guiding them to actually get started with the program actually being committed, right? Instead of just saying, got it. And why do you feel like that's the case? I've seen closers and coaches, say, ask them why they're really committed. So you really got them. It's like, no, just assume the close, dude. Just like take them over the line right away. Right. Another thing is take the deal. Right. And a lot of times people don't talk about this, but when you start talking about finances and you're trying to get that PIF because you're trying to get that commission, right? You're trying to get a full payment, as the owner. A lot of times if your program's 5K, instead of just being like, okay, well, it's $5,000 and, you're talking about, finances, different ways you can create payment plans, and they can actually do $5,000, but they're like, I think I know it's a lot. I have the money. I really feel like I can do 2,500 for 2 months, and I think that'll be better, right? In my perspective, in my belief, you have a high chance of closing that person because they just agreed to that, and I'm assuming the close, versus trying to combat them and be like, hey, Jim, but you do have the money, and then blah, 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 and you try to battle to get the 5K, and then you end up losing the deal. Because now it heightens their fear, heightens them to be like, I don't want to do this because I already told you I feel more comfortable here. A close, right? So take the close, take the deal, right? So if somebody says, yeah, I'd rather just be like, cool, no worries. Next time I do, boom, now you have the deal closed, right? So I just went over like a lot of different things here, right? Obviously the framing, obviously price anchors and bonuses, taking a deal, assuming the close. And it really takes understanding what are areas of the business that actually needs this with the closing side of things and the skill set. And what does it look like to achieve a 25 to 30% close rate at least? And then being able to understand, hey, everything here is good, and the processes and the scripts and the frameworks is what works here. And now I know I can have a book call that shows up because I have to process this in stage 2. And then in stage 3, what ends up happening is I can actually get a close rate that's predictable, and I can scale with this as well. So I know this is long, but bonus to this, right? Pixel conditioning. So when you actually start having a couple closes and you actually are getting people to come in through the funnel, now what you can do is you can reroute all of those people who have been purchases, and then make sure that the algorithm is trying to read and find those types of people who actually purchased from you or actually bought from you. And now the pixel is going to actually start being conditioned towards those type of audiences. And now you have more of a powerful way of scaling, right? So what you're essentially doing is you're optimizing ads for qualified book calls. So if you close Jimmy, you close Bobby, you close Sarah, and you close, Tammy, right? Those are the 4 closes you had the past week with these processes I already showed you. Now you can run the same funnel with a different pixel that's being optimized, or the same pixel, but now it's being optimized for a purchase event on the front end for Meta. And it's going to just be focused on those 4 purchases. And it's going to start trying to find different audiences. And every time you start dragging and dropping and rerouting, you know, Jimmy, Bob, the people that I said into a pipeline, then you can run a conversions API to make sure that the pixel is finding more of those people. And then the 5th purchase is when you update it. And then now the pixel is going to keep looking for more similar audiences from the people that actually close calls. That might get a little bit more techie and whatnot, but that's kind of the bonus tip that you can start using to make sure that once you actually book the call, they showed up, they close. Now you want the pixel to be conditioned towards those people that close, and therefore you can actually really scale to the next level, right? So hopefully this has helped when it comes to 3 different things that can actually help you when it comes to, having a funnel, running cold ads, having a product market fit, booking calls, showing calls, closing call, or showing calls that show up, closing calls, and finally making sure that you can condition that pixel so that you can scale with the marketing as well. That is it.